The Tsurubai came out of transit at 0312 hours, Kanto Shelf local time, and the 9 orbital rings lit up before their lead vessel finished deceleration. I was at the surface reception platform when it happened, Window Station Orion 7, a flat concrete apron 4 kilometers above the Kanto Shelf megacity, where the intake towers catch the high winds and the sky is close enough to read. I had been there since midnight. 22 years as an orbital watch commander, another 11 running surface reception. I had rehearsed this morning more times than I could count. Every watch commander in the Shelf network had. Every officer in the response fleet. Every archivist in the memory directorate. We had all rehearsed it, because the one thing we had never been allowed to do was forget that it would come. The first ping from Ring 1 reached my station at 0313:04. 17 vessels. Hereditary formation. The Tsurubai always flew in hereditary formation, point ship forward, the lesser hulls arrayed behind in a widening V, like a claim being presented. I had seen the formation in the archive footage so many times I recognized it before the classification system confirmed it. My deputy, a younger officer named Helen Mori, looked up from her console with wide eyes. "That's them," she said. "That's them," I agreed. I did not reach for the alert board. The alert had already been running for 11 minutes. Ring 1 had caught them on the edge of the transit window, before they were even fully through. By the time Helen said their name, Ring 3 and Ring 5 were already tracking. The response fleet at Lagrange 2 had received its activation signal. The Shelf's ground-to-orbit batteries were rotating to acquisition angles. 22,000 years of preparation does not require a man at a console to start it. It runs on its own, because that is what you build when you have 22,000 years. The Tsurubai point ship, their flagship, a long angular hull dressed in dynastic markings I recognized from the archive drawings, held position at 40,000 kilometers for 8 minutes. I watched the sensor return data scroll across my board. They were scanning. Of course they were scanning. They had come expecting to find descendants of a seeded colony, pre-spaceflight, probably agrarian, certainly unaware of their status as claimed property. What their scans were returning instead was 9 orbital defense rings, each 140 kilometers in diameter and armed with rail platforms and energy arrays. A surface infrastructure of 41 Shelf citadels linked by hardened transit corridors. A response fleet of 340 warships sitting calmly at Lagrange 2 with their running lights on, and a planet that had been waiting, specifically and deliberately, for this exact moment. The Tsurubai scanned for 8 minutes. Then they went quiet for 4 more. I had been told by older officers, people who had trained under people who had trained under people, that the Tsurubai silence would feel like a held breath. That is accurate. The platform was very still. Helen had stopped typing. The wind through the intake towers made the only sound. I watched the flagship's position on my board and I thought about the archivist who had first translated the Tsurubai seeding documents 9,000 years ago and written in the margin of her translation, "They will return. Build accordingly." Somebody had listened to her. Generation after generation, somebody had listened. The transmission came at 0331 hours. It arrived on the hereditary claim frequency, a channel Earth's communication arrays had been monitoring for 22,000 years, a channel we had kept active and staffed across every political reorganization, every century of internal conflict, every dark period when the resources were thin and the easier argument was to let the channel go dark. We never did. We kept it open because we knew they would use it when they came, and we wanted to be ready to answer. The Tsurubai commander's voice was exactly as the linguistic archives described, a layered resonance, like 2 speakers at slightly different pitches, carrying the cadences of a hereditary authority that had never expected to be refused. The translation came through my earpiece in clean standard language, because we had been refining the translation matrices for 9,000 years. This is the reclamation voice of the Tsurubai continuance. We hold primary deed over the 4th body of this system. We are here to assess the status of our seeded population and to initiate integration proceedings. Prepare your governing authority for reception. I let 3 seconds pass. Not for drama, because the protocol required 3 seconds, and the protocol had been written by people who understood that the Tsurubai measured hesitation as weakness and precision as strength. 3 seconds said, "We heard you, we are not afraid, and we are responding on our schedule." Then I pressed the transmit key. Tsurubai reclamation voice. This is Watch Commander Ren Okada, Earth Surface Reception Authority, Kanto Shelf Station. We have received your claim notice. In accordance with the Interstellar Habitation Accords, Section 14, Paragraph 3, which the Tsuruvae continuance ratified 11,000 years before your seeding of this world, we are required to inform you that a counterclaim has been registered and is now in effect. I am transmitting the documentation now. The documentation was 847 pages of legal filings, historical record, and jurisdictional argument, compiled across 9,000 years by the Memory Directorate's legal division. It cited Tsuruvae continuance law. It cited the Interstellar Habitation Accords. It cited the specific clause, ratified by the Tsuruvae themselves, long before they ceded Earth, that granted full territorial sovereignty to any ceded population that achieved Class 7 civilization status within the first 50,000 years of the seeding window. Earth had achieved Class 7 status 18,400 years ago. We had filed the counterclaim through every available interstellar relay. The Tsuruvae had simply not checked. I transmitted the 847 pages. Then I added, in the same flat professional tone, additionally, for your situational awareness, our orbital defense infrastructure is now fully active. The response fleet currently stationed at Lagrange 2 consists of 340 warships and is operating under standing orders consistent with the Accord's self-defense provisions. We have no desire for conflict. We do, however, have every legal and physical capacity to decline integration proceedings. I invite the reclamation voice to review the documentation at their convenience. Silence. Helen looked at me. I kept my eyes on the board. The silence from the Tsuruvae flagship lasted 19 minutes. I know because I watched the clock. Somewhere in those 19 minutes, the Tsuruvae commander was reading 847 pages of legal filings written in their own law, watching 340 human warships hold their Lagrange position without moving an inch, because moving would have been a provocation, and we had been very specifically trained not to provoke, and looking at 9 orbital rings that had not powered down and were not going to. At 0354 hours, the Tsuruvae flagship began to move. Not toward Earth. Away from it. The hereditary formation tightened, the lesser hulls drawing in close, and the entire fleet began a slow transit preparation burn. No further transmission. No acknowledgement of the documentation. No response to my invitation to review the filings. They were leaving. I watched them go for a long time. Helen exhaled beside me, a long, careful breath that I recognized, because I had exhaled the same way in rehearsal 100 times without knowing if the real moment would feel different. It did not feel different. It felt like the rehearsal, which meant we had rehearsed it correctly, which meant every watch commander who had drilled this scenario for 22,000 years had done their job. At 0412 hours, Ring 1 logged the Tsuruvae fleet's entry into transit and their vector out of the system. I filed the contact report. I notified the Memory Directorate. I sent the all-clear to the response fleet at Lagrange 2, and 340 warships stood down from active readiness to standard patrol posture, calmly, without ceremony, because that is what you do when the preparation worked and there is no battle to fight. Then I walked to the edge of the platform. The Kanto shelf spread out below me in the early morning light, 41 link citadels stretching to the horizon, the transit corridors catching the first sun like veins of silver. Above me, if I looked up and knew where to look, I could see the faint rings of the orbital defense network, not visible to the naked eye from the surface, but I knew where they were, because I had spent 33 years learning exactly where they were. Behind me, the intake towers hummed in the wind. I thought about the archivist who had written Build accordingly in the margin of her translation, 9,000 years ago. I did not know her name. The record did not preserve it. I thought about the budget committees that had approved the first orbital rings construction, and the ones that had approved the second, and the third, and all 9, across governments that rose and fell, across centuries when the easier argument was always to spend the resources on something more immediate, something that would show results within a human lifetime rather than 22,000 years. Somebody had always made the longer argument. Generation after generation, somebody had stood in a room and said, "They will come back. We must be ready." And enough people had listened. That is not a small thing. That is perhaps the most human thing I know how to name. The decision to prepare for a threat you will never personally see, because the people who come after you will need what you build. 22,000 years of that decision, made over and over, by people whose names we mostly do not remember. The Tsuruvae came to collect a colony. They found a civilization that had spent 22 millennia getting ready for the precise morning they arrived. They reviewed the evidence and they left without firing a shot, and they will file their own reports now, and those reports will say something that the rest of the galaxy will eventually understand. Earth is not available. Earth was never going to be available. Earth remembered what was coming and built, and waited, and remembered again, and kept building. I stood on the edge of the platform until the sun was fully up and the wind had shifted and the intake towers were singing in a different key. Then I went inside and wrote my shift report, because the work does not stop when the moment passes. The work never stops. That is the whole point. 22,000 years, and we did not forget a single day of it.